Winter 2021 was definitely a real treat when it came to the number of quality isekai we got. And while I don't think that this spring will live up to that level of standard, there are still a few promising new entries into the genre that could prove to be worthwhile. So let's take a look at every new isekai and fantasy anime from this upcoming season. Starting things off with the sequels, we first have the second season of How Not to Summon a Demon Lord, a direct continuation to the comedic isekai harem we got back in 2018, bringing us more of our overpowered protagonist steamrolling through every obstacle like it's a video game on easy mode. That said, the anime as a whole may look a little bit different due to the change in studios, so it'll be interesting to see how that affects its overall quality. Next we have the spin-off series For That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime. While it does deal with events tangentially related to the main story, if you're planning to watch this expecting the same dark fantasy we got last season, well, unfortunately you're just gonna end up very disappointed. Reason being that The Slime Diaries is really more of a slice-of-life comedy than anything else. It's by a completely different studio and adapts a spin-off manga that focuses on the growth of Tempest as a community. So, rather than the whole politics, war, and genocide that's been going on in the main story, you can instead expect a lot of comedic shorts that showcase their daily life. Now, the last sequel on the list is for the second season of Welcome to Demon School. Personally, I can't say too much about it since I haven't watched it myself, but I am told that it is a pretty good anime. So, if you're interested in yet another comedic fantasy with a decent story, then this one along with the other two may be worth your time as well. Moving on to this season's new isekai. First up we have Studio Reverute's adaptation of the light novel Slime 300, otherwise known as I've been killing slimes for 300 years and maxed out my level. Just as how the title states, our protagonist who died from overwork finds herself reincarnated as an immortal witch, one who now has the opportunity to live a life free from the stress and work of her previous one. Given that she just wants to live easy, she decides to spend the next 300 years living in seclusion, only ever going out to slay slimes for money whenever it was needed. This of course eventually leads her to maxing out her level and stats, which in turn starts to attract all sorts of unwanted attention, bringing us to the point at which the story starts. It basically becomes this comedic retelling of our main character's encounters. Visits from all these people and creatures that want to test their strength against this witch of supposedly unparalleled power. While this may seem like another generic isekai with an OP protagonist, apparently it doesn't focus too much on the whole power aspect. Instead, it's the dynamic between the characters that's said to make the novel so good. So hopefully the anime will be able to properly portray that. Now, the next anime technically isn't an isekai, but if you substitute out that parallel fantasy world for an alien planet that's practically identical to a fantasy world, then you're pretty much just dealing with an isekai without the reincarnation. I mean, the main character literally has to go to an alien planet and defeat a demon lord. But trust me when I say that this story isn't that basic. It does use a lot of the standard fantasy elements, but it applies them in ways so absurd that you'd be surprised to see them even work. Like, the fantasy world / alien planet our main character is sent to is actually nothing more than a stepping stone for an evil organization's path towards world domination. And our protagonist just so happens to be a very skilled soldier from that organization. So his job is to use this experimental teleporter to go and survey this alien planet for invasion, a foreign world so similar to a fantasy RPG that even the main character can't help but notice it. As for the demon lord he's supposed to be looking out for, well, that's actually just a rival organization who's out to do the same thing he is. So everything is pretty much an over-the-top parody of all the fantasy and isekai that we've become so accustomed to. And since it is an original story written by the same author as Konosuba, I expect it to do a fairly good job at subverting our expectations. If you're looking for something a bit more tame though, then the Saint's magic power as Omnipotent brings us a slightly more standard isekai. What makes this one different though is that we don't follow the story of the hero. Instead, we follow the girl that was summoned alongside her. While both could have been the one to possess the saint level magic, only one was accepted by the nobles to fight for them, so the other simply left to go do her own thing, which pretty much entails selling cosmetics and potions. It's an isekai that's a bit slower in the way it presents itself. And because the story is meant to target a more female demographic, there's a lot more focus on our protagonist and the romantic elements of her relationships, making it more of a slice-of-life josei than anything else. Next we have a couple fantasy series that aren't technically isekai but do take place in an alternate video game-like reality. First is the adaptation of the light novel Full Dive. The ultimate next-gen full dive RPG is even shittier than real life. Since the plot is pretty much in the title, I don't think you'd be surprised to know that the entire story takes place in a full dive RPG. The reason why it's a shitty RPG though is because the game itself attempts to be as close to reality as possible. Sure, that does mean realistic graphics and borderline sentient NPC interactions, but it also means the player's stats are only as good as they are in real life. Plus, getting hit in game results in actual pain, and any injury sustained while in the game takes several days to heal. Because of this, a lot of the player base has already left since most of the quests are practically impossible. So the story essentially follows this one high school student as he tries to complete what's pretty much a blindfolded no-hit Dark Souls run, on a dance pad. Now, the other game like anime is The World Ends With You, a series centered around a death game that involves the standard elements we've seen from many of its predecessors. There's the isolated arena, a mysterious third party that's giving the players an objective to follow, and of course a bunch of powers and abilities unique to each of the players. I haven't played the Nintendo JRPG myself, but the game and its story are said to be fairly intriguing, so I'm interested to see if the anime can live up to that. As for all the other fantasy coming this season, first we have JC Staff's adaptation of the manga Eden Zero. And if the first thing that comes to your mind is the resemblance to Fairy Tail, well, that's because this series is by the same creator. As far as I know though, the similarities to Fairy Tail end with the character designs. Yes, the story does revolve around a typical shonen adventure, but this one is more sci-fi than it is medieval. So if a shonen space fantasy was something you've been looking for, then this may be something that could pique your interests. If you're looking for something a bit more standard, then Seven Knights Revolution would be the fantasy for you. But keep in mind that it is an adaptation of a mobile game, which historically speaking haven't been too great. It does, however, fill that spot for a medieval fantasy of heroes versus the forces of evil. So perhaps a studio like Liden Films will be able to bring some life to it. Now, last but not least, we have the adaptation of the manga Dragon's House Hunting, a comedic fantasy centered around a homeless dragon. Since this dragon doesn't really like to be as menacing as the others, he finds it difficult to settle down and find a place to live. So the story pretty much follows him as he tries to do exactly that, all while being chased and hunted by the heroes and creatures around him. I can't really say that it's something I'm personally interested in, but if you're looking for another lighthearted fantasy to go with all the others, then this would be one to add to your list. But anyway, that's every isekai and fantasy coming out this season. But there are a few other shows that I think are worth mentioning as well. 86 definitely being one of the most promising ones. I mean, any anime that has Hiroyuki Sawano in charge of the music is almost always a must-watch, at least for me. I might even make an entire video dedicated to introducing this series all by itself. I just need to look into it a little bit more and see if it's actually worth talking about. If you've read the novels yourself though, then let me know in the comments if 86 is actually going to be good or not. Anyway, other anime to keep an eye out for is the return of Shaman King, Studio Brainbase's beautiful looking adaptation of the manga To Your Eternity, and finally Wit Studios' new sci-fi original Vivy, all of which are currently on my planned watch list. But yeah, that's my seasonal rundown of all the new anime, so be sure to let me know in the comments which ones you're most looking forward to. Now, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!